To fix the problem, you're doing this compromise bill. It does call for $650 million that was earmarked under Trump to actually still go to build the wall.
I am not afraid of good ideas where they occur.
Hey y'all, Atlas here. The 2024 election cycle has been, let's be honest, a long and painstaking past couple of months. But we are now only 4 days out from Election Day. So, today, I will be giving you my official election forecast as well as my final thoughts on this election cycle. But first, before we hop into it, the genocide in Gaza is still ongoing with no end in sight, so please consider donating to Operation Olive Branch, linked in the description below, to get aid directly to Palestinian families on the ground. Thank you, and enjoy the video. Also, another thing, I'm just letting you all know in advance that I am by no means some sort of election analyst. I'm just a college student majoring in political science. A lot of my prediction reasoning is actually based on some stuff I've learned from the Mentum newsletter. He's been doing a lot of insightful, leftist-oriented election analysis, so I decided to link his Substack in the description. Hey, consider taking a look at that if you're interested. Very insightful stuff. In order to make an informed election forecast, you obviously have to first consider the polls. Here we are on Real Clear Polling's website, which is basically a site that aggregates a bunch of different polls in order to try and predict how races in the big battleground states are going to go. Now, if you take each of these polls at face value and say that these poll aggregates are 100% accurate, flawless, this is what the electoral map would look like. Wisconsin and Michigan would go to Harris, while Donald Trump would pick up Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. That would obviously mean a Trump victory. However, that is in some sort of fantasy land where polls are 100% accurate, which they never are. The truth is, every single one of these leads, whether they are by Harris or by Trump, are within the margin of error. That being said, if you followed the polls in 2016 and 2020, you can see that the polls still look bad for Kamala. In both 2016 and 2020, pollsters underestimated the Republican vote, meaning that the actual election results were 1 or 2 points to the right of where the polls said they were. So, if the actual results are a little to the right of the polls, then the election would be a Trump blowout. So, we're all fucked, right? Wrong. If you don't remember, there was a midterm election in 2022, and when those polls were taken, the polling industry was really worried. They got 2 major elections wrong in a row and were losing credibility fast. So, when they put out the polls for 2022, they tried to correct themselves, except they overcorrected hard. The media for weeks before had written story after story, headline after headline about how there was going to be this big red wave, and how Republicans were going to wipe the floor with Democrats in the upcoming election. Except that's not what happened. Republicans flopped. Like, really hard. Yes, Republicans were able to take a few seats in the House of Representatives, but they should have taken a lot more, and they failed to take the Senate. The majority in the House was so slim, in fact, that it took Republicans 15 different speaker votes to actually get the majority they needed. So I definitely still say that Kevin McCarthy is very much a loser. How did the pollsters fail so badly in 2022? In order to try to correct themselves, the pollsters added a bunch of really bad partisan pollsters to their aggregates, and some have argued that pollsters are making the same mistakes that they did in 2022. Furthermore, we have really good results from the Washington primary, which is one of a few election year bellwethers, the bellwethers in election forecasting being the results of a few different smaller elections. What's interesting about the Washington primary, though, is that the margin that Democrats win that primary by, it's an open primary, has generally been an indicator of how well Democratic presidential candidates will perform nationally. One of the reasons people think this is because of the demographics of Washington itself. Obviously, the vote inside of Seattle leans heavily towards the Democratic column, but the rest of Washington's demographics are very similar to the Rust Belt, meaning they're probably going to vote similar to the way the Rust Belt votes. And those of you who are pretty familiar with the Electoral College probably understand the relevance of this. If Kamala can win those 3 big Rust Belt states, as well as Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, that is just enough electoral votes to push her to victory. So, with all that being said, what does my Electoral College prediction look like? I predict that Kamala will win all 3 of the Rust Belt states because of polling, as well as the reason I just gave you. Kamala is also roughly 10 points ahead in Nebraska's 2nd district, so I predict that Nebraska's 2nd will obviously go to her. These states alone are already enough to just barely push her to victory. So my prediction for the Sun Belt is going to be a little less serious and a little bit more based on gut feeling, because once again, I'm not a professional election analyst. So I think Kamala will win Nevada because Nevada hasn't voted for a Republican president since 2004, and I don't expect Nevada to buck that trend anytime soon. I also believe that Kamala will win the state of Arizona because the polls are relatively favorable for Ruben Gallego. I can't imagine anyone voting for Ruben Gallego and then also going and casting their vote for Donald Trump. I feel like that doesn't make sense, but maybe I just don't understand the median voters' politics. And the other reason that I think Arizona will go to Kamala is because Arizona is a uniquely weird Republican state. We're the John McCain state, and as a result, I'm pretty sure there is a big population here of never-Trumpers. I believe, however, that Donald Trump will move Georgia back into the Republican column, and that he will take North Carolina. And so, the Absent Atlas election desk forecasts that Kamala will win 287 electoral votes and go on to become the next president of the United States. I'll be honest with you, watching the 2024 election season unfold in real time has been pretty terrifying. Every headline we've seen over the past 4 years is something The Onion would have written in like 2012. Most of this election cycle has just been respectable bipartisan versus
I am Adolf Hitler, command of the Third Reich. Little known fact, also 2 points a mic.
It's like they're both competing to see who can be the most repulsive candidate possible. The Harris campaign and the Trump campaign have both been objectively awful, not only in terms of the depravity of their platforms, but also in terms of the political calculus that's being done. On one hand, you have the Trump campaign. Not only is Donald Trump deeply unpopular, but he's a bad politician. Trump cannot win the election with his base alone, no matter how fanatic they are about him. He needs to appeal to moderates and independents who have been largely alienated by Trump's radical rhetoric. He will never be able to present himself as someone more moderate because he's narcissistic, extremely racist, and delusional. And he has absolutely zero filter, so he can't even pretend to be someone who isn't those things. Instead, he's trying to tap into the last few bastions of unengaged far-right voters. His campaign is basically courting 4chan at this point. Then you have the Harris campaign. At the start, it was incredible. One could even say it was feminine-nominal. I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself. I mean, record-breaking fundraising. She seemed like she was getting serious about holding Israel accountable. Her marketing was really good. And then you had the Veep stakes, and while Kamala didn't pick the best candidate, shout out to my king, Andy Bashar.
But I don't believe that government should be making your decisions. So if you enjoy Diet Mountain Dew, you be you. We want to support you.
She chose the next best thing, the progressive and highly accomplished Tim Walz. But eventually, Kamala could no longer resist the urge that every Democrat politician succumbs to. The urge to be cucked by the Republican Party. Instead of tearing down the wall, her messaging became, I can build the wall better than he can. Instead of an arms embargo, we got,
you know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking.
Instead of Republicans are weird, the message became, I love Dick Cheney so much, he's my best friend. And just like that, the magic was gone. Would you look at that? And the race went from a Kamala blowout to a dead heat. See, Kamala's strategy should have been more like what the Trump campaign has been doing. Whereas Trump had basically fully mobilized his base already, Kamala had nearly an infinite well of disillusioned progressive voters she could have tapped into. There are so many widely popular policies she could have campaigned on to galvanize the progressive voting bloc. But instead of running a campaign based on hope for the future, Kamala decided to run a campaign built around fear-mongering, classic Democrat candidate shenanigans. Vote for me because I'm not Donald Trump. If you don't vote for me, Donald Trump is going to take all your rights and freedoms away. If you don't vote for me, Donald Trump is going to flatten Gaza and build Trump hotels on top of the rubble. As opposed to me, who's still gonna flatten Gaza, but I'll pretend to give a shit about all the dead Palestinian children. So, why does this happen? Why are both campaigns competing to see who can lose this election the hardest? It's not that both campaigns are deliberately trying to be as bad as possible. It's that they've grown totally complacent, because to the people in power, it doesn't matter who wins this election. Because on 95% of the actual issues, Democrats and Republicans hold the same positions. Instead, both parties run their campaigns on a few carefully selected wedge issues. And don't get me wrong, the wedge issues are certainly important, but they're made to be wedge issues because regardless of whether or not the policy actually substantially changes on the issues, it won't change the balance of power. But the wedge issues are just important enough to seriously create partisan divide among the working class. After all, we don't want them to be cohesive and organized, lest they start some sort of revolution or, God forbid, start unionizing. Ugh. And because running campaigns cost money and the success of campaigns are dependent on money, that offers the capital class the perfect opportunity to exert leverage over the two major parties. Political donations. That's why both parties have a lot of the same donors and why sometimes corporations will donate to candidates on both sides of a race, so that no matter who wins the election, their interests are secured. Such is the power of the capital class, and thus the status quo is indefinitely maintained until the system inevitably collapses in on itself. Actually, there was this pretty chill guy with a beard who wrote about some of this stuff. But in spite of everything, even under such dire straits as these, the American left never fails to constantly bicker. Oh my god. If you aren't voting for Kamala because of Palestine, your conscientious objection vote is just food for your privilege. Need this election to be over. Hope Coconut Genocide Lady loses and all her little Hitlerite supporters lose their fucking minds. To say some of y'all are acting like children would be an insult to actual children. Some of you would rather virtue signal by infighting than actually bring attention to Palestinians being slaughtered with our tax dollars. And I get it. I do. This issue is insanely emotionally charged. I mean, some of us have seen friends and family slaughtered in the Gaza Strip. Direct that energy towards the people facilitating and carrying out the genocide, not towards your comrades. Maybe for some of you, you could make this decision very easily. There wasn't a doubt in your mind about how you were going to vote. But for a lot of us, that decision was a gut-wrenching one. On one hand, Kamala Harris aided and abetted Joe Biden's genocide of the Palestinian people for a whole year. And she has no sign that she will do anything to end the genocide of the Palestinian people, unless it is, of course, in the interest of maintaining American hegemonic power. And if you do vote for her, you are sending the message that you will vote for the Democratic Party no matter how much genocide they commit. If you don't draw the line at genocide, where will you draw it? As Aaron Bushnell said, this is what the ruling class has decided will be normal. On the other hand, while Trump and Kamala are the same on 95% of the issues, the other 5% of issues can severely impact millions of people, particularly the most vulnerable in our communities. For instance, if Trump were to do something like ban gender-affirming care in the United States, that would upend the lives of hundreds of thousands of the most vulnerable people in the country. And I've talked to plenty of trans people who have said dying is preferable to stopping hormone therapy. I mean, that alone could culminate in tens of thousands of suicides. And that's just one example of one of these issues, right? So, no matter what you choose, terrible things are going to happen. Or at least continue to happen. It's horrific that the capital class forces people to choose between the two. And we should have empathy for people who come to a different decision than us, because we are all trying to end this genocide, we're all trying to end apartheid, and we're all trying to protect our communities. Divided we beg, united we bargain, correct? Thank you all so much for watching today's video. Please consider checking out Operation Olive Branch in the description to get aid directly to the Palestinian families on the ground. Hope you all enjoyed today's video, or at least got some value out of it. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you all in the next one. Peace.